All right. Welcome to Soft Network. For those of you that are new to the channel, we're a channel solely devoted towards the special operations community, first responders, veterans, high performers. Our goal really is to hit our 3Cs, which is our clients, our clinicians, and then the soft community. If you're new to the channel, please, there's a whole video in our channel that goes over what we're doing, why we're doing it. This video or this interview is a little bit of a deviation. We're right in the middle of a mini series on psychedelics. Perfect timing because the executive order was just signed yesterday. At the time we're recording this, that President Trump signed for psychedelics. And so, Chris, you're our third interview, maybe our fourth, coming off a long weekend, third or fourth, looking into psychedelics, but want to explore your background, how you got into it. Also, you're a veteran yourself. I want to explore that because you and I have never talked about that. So let me first introduce you real quick. So Christopher Brown, a licensed independent clinical social worker, is a licensed psychotherapist specializing in EMDR and psychedelic harm reduction and integration therapy, serving on the International Working Group for Psychedelic-Assisted EMDR. Chris is certified by MDRIA and as an EMDR therapist and consultant, a Marine Corps veteran, combat veteran from 04 to 08, 2 deployments to Iraq, 1 to Afghanistan, and a Purple Heart recipient. Chris started his therapy journey in 08 as an EMDR client, discovering the profound healing potential it can bring. Following a call before grad school, he founded a nonprofit calling Growing Veterans, which since 2012 has use sustainable farming as the catalyst for peer support, fulfilling the mission to grow food, community, and each other. Using innovative peer support training and community farming practices, Growing Veterans exists for a vision to end the isolation that leads to suicide and has been successful in the lives of many. For the first 7 years of his clinical career, he used EMDR to provide PTSD therapy to veterans at the US Department of Veteran Affairs, where he also received the 100-hour MDMA-Assisted Therapy training from MAPS. A private practice owner since 2023, Chris works with a diverse client base from special operation veterans to first responders, tech workers, to creatives, entrepreneurs, and executives. For the past year, he's been building Helicon as a clinician-led response to the mental health crisis. Helicon is a software company with a mission to help therapists expand their EMDR skills and their impact on society. Chris, I'm pumped for this, man. How you doing? Yeah, just a little bit. I'm sure they'll be fine a little bit, or we'll drown it out with the software. So, just a little bit of backstory. Chris and I met 3 years ago. Does that seem right? Okay, so that would be 2023, because you were still at the VA, right? You were just about to jump into private practice. Yeah. So I met with Chris, and he, blew me away from everything he was doing. I interviewed him to be a clinician on Soft Network, and I think Steven, was he your second? Does that sound right? And again, anybody that's worked with you knows the quality of your work, the detailed, the professionalism, but also your expertise. And so I can honestly say, I've said this many times on this podcast, I love getting to meet all the people that I've gotten to meet. And a huge part of this podcast I love is just sharing you guys with the world, because you're, again, one of the clinicians that I think is just phenomenal.
But I really think it came down to not wanting to leave the guys that I had developed these relationships with. And, having been in, three different deployments, those relationships were so important. I mean, without them, I don't think I would have made it home. So yeah, I guess fast forwarding a little bit, we were stationed in 29 Palms, which is where all the Marines at the time, and probably still, would have to go through a big iteration of training to kind of qualify to deploy overseas. And because we were stationed there, we were doing these ranges like all the time. And we had really good training, and we employed that training in the war zone really effectively. But 3 deployments in 4 years. On my first deployment, I was a saw gunner, and I probably weighed, I think I was under 150 at the time, like just a skinny guy carrying a squad-on medic weapon, which for people listening, they're heavy for someone that size, and all the extra ammo with it. Like, we were infantry, so foot patrols all the time, like just so much wear and tear on the body. So after 4 years of that, I was happy to get out and figure out how to repair my mind and body at that point. But I mean, do you want to go through like any of the details of the deployments, or?
Yeah, just a quick note for those that hear the background noise. His dog is as intelligent as he is, and so he's trying to get at him. But
get in the door.
I know. No, honestly, that story, thinking about your opportunity to screen to go to recon, I mean, highlights exactly the caliber of human being that I've gotten to know. But also, I just want to highlight, like, most 18, I mean, you might have been 19 at that point, but like most 18-year-olds are not thinking that far ahead. And also, obviously, those guys mean a tremendous amount to you, having gone through those 3 deployments. But even before then, for somebody to make that kind of a decision, like that's really special, I think, because for a variety of reasons. One, like you said, you wanted to go to war with people that you knew, that you trusted, but at the same time, to think collectively versus individualistically at that point, or individually rather at that point, one kind of just goes against typical behavior for kids that age. But I think just highlights, perfect kind of encapsule of who I know you to be. So it's an amazing part of that story. But yeah, absolutely.
I don't feel that way about it. I don't know. I feel like, I guess I have my own negative stigma toward the decision I made. I've worked with a lot of soft vets, special operations guys since, even Marine recon guys, through my clinical capacity. And I mean, the kind of stuff they did, I think I would have loved doing. But I also think my body and mind would be even more screwed up at this point if I had.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't imagine jumping out of airplanes and having hard landings and stuff like that. Like, that's just brutal. But anyway, thank you. I'll try to accept the compliment.
No, I think you bring up a great point from a clinical standpoint. Obviously, we both worked with a lot of soft individuals. And as you brought that up, it reminded me of a story I heard, and I'm not going to disclose anything. But the individual that I was working with was very accomplished in the soft community, right? Lots of qualifications, was everything you could imagine to a certain degree. And yet this individual was fixated and on something in a very early transition from his original MOS to it wasn't even special operations, it was a secondary MOS. And that one decision for him was the moment that he actually felt accomplished, and felt more accomplished than he did in completing a screening course for special operations. And so I just think, obviously we have our own journeys, and there's, just like you said, there's these decisions that we make along the way, and these forks in the road that sometimes have a lot more impact than we even realized, for the good or for the bad. But yeah, something you said sparked that. But so obviously you decide, hey, I want to, roll with the guys I've got, and you ended up in 3 deployments. Yeah, take us through whatever you want to share, but the notable experiences that kind of shaped, obviously your time in the Marine Corps, but who you are as well.
Okay, so first deployment, 05, 06. These were 7-month deployments. So the first half, we were in the city of Fallujah within months after the big battle had occurred. So it was kind of post the battle, and running, local security patrols. I mean, it was kind of inspiring to see the local populace kind of rebuilding the city. There was a lot of construction going on, and we were there for the first elections since the Saddam regime had collapsed, and we were providing security for the local elections, and that was kind of neat to be a part of. Halfway through that deployment, well, I guess I should say, majority of that time, it wasn't very like high kinetic combat. There was pop shots here and there, random, quick, fleeting attacks. We did take some casualties. In that environment, it's messy, and the what am I trying to say here? The local, I guess, insurgency group was paying kids to throw grenades in our Humvees, and one of the guys in our sister platoon got hit by a grenade like that, and fortunately the corpsman was right there in the back of the Humvee with him, and he has a scar from ear to here from this grenade. I mean, he would have bled out pretty quickly. The corpsman wasn't there to immediately apply pressure, and they medevaced him right away, and he survived. We had a observation post that was kind of in the edge of our AO, and I think the insurgency knew that, because it was the only place they attacked. And if you had it, like, our whole company would rotate out squads through this OP, and I remember getting there for the first time, and it was kind of known as the place that you go, like, if you haven't got your combat action ribbon yet, you're gonna get it here. And when we showed up to relieve the squad that was there, they were looking really tired and worn down. They had taken fire that night before, and one of my friends looked at me and he's like, "Good luck tonight." And that night, while I was asleep, there was an RPG attack on the front post, and one of the guys in my squad got hit and was wounded and medevac. And that was the first incident where, like, it was real. They were attacking us. One of our guys was hurt, and I think that was the event that kind of shifted my attitude and my mindset toward all this, just kind of getting hit with a dose of reality. Shortly after, we pushed out to kind of a more rural farmland area outside of the city. And for the
Chris,
rest of
before you go into that, put a little bit more detail to that. What was your previous mindset? And then when that event happened where he got wounded with an RPG, like, what shifted, and in what direction or approach was your mentality at that point?
So my seniors at the time were guys who had joined before 9/11, and they had a much different attitude towards all of it. Like, they were they were salty and bitter, and like one of them joked that he thought he had joined the Peace Corps instead of the Marine Corps. He didn't want to be there. So like they were influencing the way that I thought about it all. And then an incident like this happens, and I realize, like, you know, I've only been in for less than a year. I've got 3 more years of this. I need to like get my shit together and get my head in the game here. So, you know, there was a few months where that mentality started to creep into the way that I was viewing myself in that role. And then this kind of snapped me out of it. So did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. So we pushed out to this farmland area. It's kind of along the Euphrates River, and majority of that second half of the deployment, we were digging up weapons caches, you know, like a bunch of artillery rounds dug into the dirt alongside the banks of the Euphrates. And, you know, like backbreaking work. We'd sometimes patrol like 20 kilometers to get there, and then start digging, and we're digging till nightfall, and then we're waiting around for EOD to come blow everything up, and then like walking back. So we didn't take a lot of fire at that point, but we were doing some pretty heavy duty physical work. And then we left. We trained for 6 months to a year to deploy again, and we deployed right back to that same area, same AO. And the Army had taken over when we left, but I guess they left shortly after, and so it was kind of like, I guess, uncontested. And the insurgency effort had moved in, and it was like not recognizable. There was we had intel reports like there were kill houses in the area. They had set up checkpoints so local residents couldn't even go to the market. Yeah, it was very different. It was controlled by the insurgents at that point. And so we were being told, like, you know, this is going to be and this was during the troop surge of 2007. We were being told, like, this is going to be a much different deployment than your last one. And, you know, part of me didn't believe it because, you know, I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to. But our first patrol, we were the first squad of our platoon to go on patrol. When we first got into our AO, we walked less than 50 yards and found a small cache with machine guns, AKs, a bunch of rounds, just like placed there, ready to go. And that's where my brain kind of was like, okay, this is unusual. We never rolled up on something like this last time.
When you guys are finding these caches, obviously in the previous deployment, I would imagine you guys had intel locals that, you know, said, hey, dig here, or like, how are you guys finding this?
We were in the first deployment, we had engineers with us with mine detectors that they would just kind of be in the front of patrol with. This time it was literally just, we were supposed to patrol. We had like a route set up, and this was like the very beginning of our route. We're just kind of like peeking in this abandoned building, and it's right there. So like, okay. So we, you know, our whole plan changed, and EOD came and blew the stuff up. And then we kind of pushed further in to the area over, because the way that we operated, they called it dwell ops. Like, you set up a patrol base in a home, and you're there for 3-4 days, and then you move on to the next one. And you're just doing that over and over and over again. So we did that and moved into kind of different zones to patrol the area and try to, you know, do our job. But we had moved up toward a market. One of the markets that we were being told was like a hot zone that they were running checkpoints to prevent people from getting into. We're being told all this stuff, and I'm in my mind, I'm like, we used to get told all this stuff all last deployment, and like nothing bad really ever happened. So again, I'm like doubting, like this is even a risk. But just to be safe, we had our squad, we had a machine gun team, a mortar team, and a sniper team all attached to our patrol. And there was probably 20 more Marines on this patrol. But we start walking down a kind of a canal toward the market area, and I'll never forget it. I saw like a burial site, like a mini cemetery. And to the new guys who had never been there before, I was like, "Hey guys, do you know what that is?" Just kind of messing with them, And I told them it's a cemetery, and I literally turned back to keep walking forward, and the next step, we just got lit up, machine gun fire. Bullets are landing all around me. I get in the prone, I look over, and half the squad is in the canal already. And so I kind of stirred into the canal too. The first two teams moved down into this kind of open area. And the way that we had kind of set it up was my team was responsible for like security and overwatch. We had a team that was like the assault team, and a team that was support. And so we all like did our jobs the way that we were trained. And the machine gunners went with the first two, and the mortarmen stayed with me. And on the range in California, we do these ranges where we've got machine guns suppressing fire, mortars suppressing fire, infantry moving up. And like we train like that all the time, but I never thought in Iraq we'd do that, right? Sure enough, like my guys were carrying the extra mortar rounds, and I told them to throw them over to the mortar guys. And I see, machine gun on a rooftop, and I start calling out to the mortar team, like, the direction and range and walking targets on, just like we do in training. So it was the only gunfight I was ever in where we had all of those elements of Marine Corps infantry working together and doing our job. And it's like, it's this weird thing. I was talking to a friend of mine who was EOD, like we commiserate a lot about our experiences and the stuff we had to go through, and the stuff we deal with since. But like when you're in that mode where you're applying your craft, and we're with this incident, nobody was killed, nobody was wounded, like we just did our job and executed it really well. Like that feels great. I just don't know how else to say it. I mean, that I've met with so many guys who ended up going on 20 years going in and out of a war zone, and I think that's what they were chasing, is like that good adrenaline, like we just executed our job flawlessly kind of a feeling. I mean, there's nothing else like it that I've ever felt. It's just crazy. So anyhow, like just to complete that story, the guys that moved up, I'm starting to lose comms with them, and the mortar team was out of rounds, and I was like, hey, we need to push up and relink with the rest of the squad. And so we start kind of moving down, we're bounding across this field, and then we start getting lit up again from a little bit further down on the canal that we were just at. Like, I'm face down in the mud, bullets landing all around me, and I hear on my radio, Brown, where's your squad at? And I'm like, hold on, I'll pop pyro, and I load up a pyro round and shoot it up in the air. And right when the pyro went off, the rest of the squad is just right on that berm that we were at to just press the enemy. And I mean, it was just beautifully executed.
Mm.
I'm kind of getting fired up just thinking about it. But anyhow, that ended, and at that point forward, we're like, nobody can mess with us. Like, we have got this figured out. And that was kind of like the attitude we had for the rest of the deployment until the last month we were there. We got hit by a suicide bombing. That it was a truck that tried to drive into the patrol base we were in. Fortunately, one of my friends on the roof stopped him short, and the trajectory that the truck stopped in saved our lives, because essentially the engine block became a projectile, and it went through the empty house next to us instead of the one we were in. But this suicide bombing initiated a complex attack on the patrol base we were in, and we had over 20 guys get Purple Hearts that day.
Holy cow.
We had a ton of wounded. No KIA. Again, like, we joked about having we called it the Echo Angel in Iraq. Like, both of those deployments, nobody in our company was killed. The sister companies had lost folks, but we just got really lucky. And so, got out of that deployment, wounded, not excited about the idea of deploying again. My wife, we had gotten married before I deployed that time. And so she got the call, like, your husband was in an incident, he was wounded. She had to call my parents and tell them. And, like, reality set in again. Like, this is not something I think I want to keep doing. And
You're good, man. He's persistent.
Something's wrong out there. He needs to tell me. So we had gotten married in a courthouse, and we had planned to get married on the same day with like an actual wedding the year following. So after this deployment, we had that wedding, and this is kind of a funny story. So I had this plan to get married, go on the honeymoon, and call my platoon sergeant while I'm in Hawaii to ask for a leave extension. and that's exactly what I did. And he's like, "Damn you, Brown." And when I got back, move my wife in. She came down to California. We're in kind of local housing. And Monday morning, coming back to work after all that, for punishment for what I did, for like doing the leave request thing, they pull me from my platoon. They put me as the company police sergeant that kind of does more like logistics stuff for the company. They put me on, I don't even remember what it's called, where you have to like stand watch for 24 hours at the barracks. And they tell me that we're deploying to Afghanistan in 4 months. All of this Monday morning after getting married and doing the honeymoon. And so I have to go back home 24 hours later because I had to stand watch and tell my wife the news.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I thought was going to be like a year of us living in California together, kind of starting our marriage the way that it should be, and then getting out, I'm spending the next 3-4 months doing training, another build up to go to Afghanistan. And so when I got to Afghanistan, as you can imagine, I was already done. Like, I did not want to be there. I didn't want to put my family through that anymore. It was a different kind of enemy. These guys have been fighting since however long, like the Russians in the 80s, like they were war torn pros, and the culture was so vastly different than anything I could have ever imagined. It was just like another world. So I was part of a group we called partial deployers, and basically because we had to take this mandatory like end of enlistment class before we got out, they made us take that before we deployed. That way they could send us home like a week before we get out. So we take this class. Everybody's like still drunk from the night before, hungover, like not paying attention. All I remember is like this thing that helps write a resume. And then I'm going to war. So we're there, and I'm a partial deployer, and we had this sort of like agreement with our platoon sergeant. The guys who are next up to go home, they're not going on patrol anymore. So they would, we had I think 5 or 6 in the group I was in, and I was at the end. So I'm like watching all my friends get to kind of stay back while I'm going out on patrol over and over and over again. And then it finally gets to me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so close. It was so exciting and so terrifying at the same time. Because every time you go out, like there's a chance that you're not gonna make it. We had the AO we were in. The Echo Angel did not follow us to Afghanistan. We had guys who were getting killed. Just a few streets down from us. So it was pretty terrifying. And I was, using tactics that I know helped us survive in Iraq, that the people that were with me now were not familiar with and weren't supportive of. And it was just frustrating. Like we would do this thing where we'd break off from the regular patrol column to kind of confuse the enemy. And I tried doing that on a patrol, and I got chewed out for it. I'm like, what? This is crazy. So I was ready to go by the time I got out. But I was in Afghanistan one day. 2 weeks later, I was landing in SeaTac and home. And no support, like from the Marines or anybody for like VA disability, or like I didn't know any of that. None of that came to me as in the form of like a useful resource. So, I had a rough couple months. My guys were still over there. I'm having survivor's guilt, drinking all the time. My wife and I were staying at my parents' place. We got out in, I think, August, and we were there for a month before we moved to where we're going to be in school. My wife helped me figure out how to use the GI Bill. So we got ready to go to school, and I think it was the night before we moved that a childhood friend came over. He was going to help move the next day, and we ended up getting drunk, and we got into a fight, and I like bloodied up his face really bad. It was horrible, really embarrassing. But maybe the best thing that ever happened to me, looking back at it, because that next week my dad came up and he shared a story from his time in the Navy where he had gotten into a fight with a friend and ended up doing, like, I think he called it anger management. And he used his own story to tell me, like, I think you should go talk to somebody. And so this was like within a month of getting out, I'm already being told I should get some help. And I'm really glad that I did, because within that next week or two, I was in therapy. I met an EMDR therapist who was a former Army medic. easy rapport.
First one out of the gate, first try.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So I did EMDR and group therapy for good 2 years while I was getting going in school. I started school in IT. I did a year of IT classes, and then kind of had this God moment that showed me the path forward was not IT. It was in mental health. It was actually in a psychology 101 class where I decided I wanted to change my major, and it all worked out to where I was able to. I did my undergrad in human services with a psychology minor, and then went on to clinical social work track.
What was the moment? If it was a moment or a process?
It was a process. In my therapy, this guy, he was a Christian himself, and so we were able to have conversations about faith and spirituality, and kind of coming to grips with the crisis of faith that I had had in the military, and reconnecting with that. I started listening to God again, and seeing some of the signs that I think God was putting out in the world for me. It's hard to recall every specific incident, but there was having to register for classes, assessing whether or not I'd have to do extra coursework in order to make that switch, and it turns out that I had the perfect amount of credits to not have to worry about it. To making that determination and registering for these classes that I thought were perfect for me, and not getting into any of them, and then finding the ones that I did get into were actually the ones I was supposed to be taking. It's like getting slapped across the face over and over again until you realize you're on the right path, dummy. just let go of having control over everything. And in those group therapy sessions, there were some really good guys. One of the guys was in the sister battalion from me, so it was cool to kind of connect with them and learn about kind of what they were doing on the other side of the river, sort of thing. Another Marine who served in Ramadi, I'm pretty sure he was there during all this stuff that Jocko talks about. He was one of the Marines that was there. And he had some close people that he lost. And, kind of wrestling with all this with those guys and talking about implications with faith and just kind of what this means for us now and our future. It all just kind of clicked together. I got baptized around the same time because I grew up in the Catholic Church, so I was baptized as a baby.
Yeah.
But, coming more into kind of, I guess, the non-denominational Christian understanding, I realized that's a decision I want to make. And so I made that decision. And so that was part of it too. All of these were happening around the same time for me. And it just felt like God was taking control of the wheel, and I was along for the ride.
I want to back up just a little bit. For those of us that have never been in war or experienced that, so you had mentioned kind of the salty, maybe bitter approach that your seniors had when you were in Afghanistan, but then after your guys's, I'll say successful response to that ambush, walking along the canal, there was a little bit of, it sounded like confidence and,
Yeah.
I've heard other people say, after being in combat successfully over time, there's a level of invincibility that sometimes can creep in, but there's also a healthy version of it as well, because the fear's kind of gone. for you, and from your experience, like which was the healthiest, or is there a healthy, and maybe you didn't even mention either one, but is there a healthier or better approach for individuals that are, about to enter that theater?
A healthier approach to the confidence? Is that what you're asking?
Not necessarily to the confidence of mindset, like
Oh,
you hear, and your story is no different. You hear individuals that have an idea of what it's like, and then obviously the reality of it changes. But
sure.
there is a sense of adrenaline, all the physiological responses to an intense combat situation. But then, like your response to that, I'm sure can go way too far, right? You could be well too confident in that type of situation, and then that could get you in trouble down the road. But
Yeah.
I guess my question is like, is there a healthy, or is there like an ideal mindset for somebody that's working and operating in combat?
Oh, yeah. I mean, as confident as I was, I still had a healthy level of fear every patrol we went on. I kind of skipped over the part where we had a very real sniper threat in the AO that we were in. There was some like big league foreign sniper that supposedly was training people on us.
Mm.
We had quite a few guys get hit with sniper rounds in those few months. And those patrols, we called it hard targeting, where if you're out in the open, you do not stop moving.
Mm.
Do not stop moving. And if you've got, if you're tired and have 50 to 100 pounds of gear on you, and it's 110 degrees out, and you've already been walking for 4 miles, the task of do not stop moving is not an easy thing to do. Like, all you want to do is sit down, drink some water. But the fear of, if like, literally, I would think, if somebody is looking at me through crosshairs right now, what do I need to be doing? And that was my thought every time we went out, like the whole time we were out. So having a healthy level of fear along with the confidence, I think, balanced that out quite a bit. I mean, it's like, I'm afraid that I might get killed right now, but I'm confident if they miss, we'll know what to do.
Mm.
Right? So,
Yeah.
I guess measuring skill against reality, against threat, like you can't ignore all of them. You have to be honest with your skill and your experience level. If somebody has never been in a gunfight like that, I think their level of fear should be higher, not having any sort of frame of reference to lean on. So, kind of like, I don't know the best formula, but in my mind, it's kind of like a ratio.
Mm.
It's like the experience level might dictate the fear level, but even if you're the most experienced person in the world, if you let go of that fear, you're probably going to find yourself in trouble, because that fear, I think, is a good regulator in some respects. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The only other thing that I wanted to also circle back on, just because I've heard you get a little bit more detail or read a little bit more detail on a couple of your LinkedIn posts. Give us the scale. So that truck bomb, right? Like, how big was the truck, and then how big was the explosion? And was the Purple Heart tied like directly to the explosion? Is that where you got injured?
Man, this was a dump truck.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It was a dump truck. It left a crater in the yard, like a crater the size of a truck. The only like discernible part of the truck left was the engine block that was in the house next to us.
Holy cow.
The the way that we had set things up, we'd park our Humvees around the edge of the house, because these are like up armored, really strong, sturdy Humvees. And when we talked about it, it's like, these are going to protect us from mortar attacks. You know, if the mortar misses the house and lands outside, the Humvee will absorb that. The Humvees up front, they absorbed quite a bit of the blast, but they were just like, I think I have pictures of them. They were destroyed.
Yeah, if you got pictures, send me. I'll put them up during this.
Okay. Yeah, it was bad, and there was a trailer up there that caught fire. All the windows in the house were obviously shattered. We had a fob a couple miles down, and when it went off, they thought that they were getting attacked a couple miles away.
Oh cow!
That's how big this blast was. The parapet on the roof was, I think, in rubble. The room I was in, it was actually right behind those Humvees in the front of the house. I was sleeping at the time. I woke up to my friend on the roof shooting a burst from the, I think it was a 240. And that woke me up, and I thought, oh, this is like a normal gunfight attack. And so I start crawling to my gear, and then boom, like fireball. I had what I thought there was rubble on me. I thought that the house had collapsed. The doors from the room had been blown off their hinges.
Oh,
so they landed on me. And so I'm laying there in my underwear with a door on me. The whole house is on me, and I can't see anything. And
is this at night or during the day?
This is during the day, but you know, like, it's dusty still, and my eyes are closed because I'm like praying to God and just thinking, this is it. Like, I literally thought that was it. And then somebody rips the doors off of my body, and we're like, Brown, are you okay? And I like look around, and I realize the walls are still there, and I'm like, yeah, I'll be all right. And I grabbed the nearest gear. Like, everybody's grabbed the nearest gear. I couldn't find my own. But I look out, and the trailer that was attached to one of the Humvees in the front was on fire, and we're getting like shot and, you know, machine gun fire all around. And my first thought was, somebody needs to put out that fire. Nobody cared about the fire, and I realized I need to not care about the fire too. And so I grabbed gear, threw it on, and I moved to the back of the house where a lot of the gunfire was coming from. And me and another guy from my squad, we kind of posted up on the back wall. We were taking turns. I had a 203 grenade launcher underneath my rifle, and so I'm launching grenade rounds while I'm reloading. He's shooting, and we just kind of go back and forth like that. And then a few minutes into it, my platoon sergeant comes to us. He's like, we're running low on ammo on the roof. We need to go out to the trucks and get more. And that was the last thing I wanted to do, was leave the safety of this house. It's like, okay. And so we run out there, and luckily it was, you know, right outside the truck with the ammo. And he hops in the back. I'm standing in, like, at the back, and he throws me the ammo cans. I pick them up to run inside, and I didn't remember this part for like 3 years later. Something in my mind, I think I had to dissociate going outside that house. I think that's the only way I survived it. But running back to the house, I was shot through the leg, and that's where the Purple Heart comes from. I didn't even feel it. The adrenaline was so high, I didn't feel it. I ran up to the roof with the ammo cans. We dispersed it. The gunfire starting to slow down, and once it finally stops, I start heading back downstairs, and I'm barefoot still. I've got my underwear on, and then like
whitey tighties or boxers. We need to know this.
They're white boxers. I've got a picture.
Gosh.
Yeah, white boxers, airy, so cool down. It was so hot there. But I'm walking back down the stairs barefoot with boxers, and then my flak and Kevlar on, and my rifle. And QRF had arrived already, and our company commander was there. And he looks at me as I'm walking down. He's walking up. We exchange looks, and he just kind of gives me this nod and keeps walking. Because normally, if he saw me like that, I'd be getting my ass chewed. It's like, why don't you have your boots and stuff on? But we were collecting casualties downstairs, and that's when I realized, like, okay, we did not make it totally unscathed here. A lot of guys with like shrapnel wounds. A few of us had taken bullet grazes. Like several were like heavily concussed, and we're trying to keep them awake.
I imagine so.
One of them had a collapsed lung. When the blast went off, he like launched into a sink against his ribs and collapsed his lung. But none of us were killed. And they start loading guys up into the QRF trucks, casualties, to get medevac. And I had gotten like a kind of pressure bandage wrapped around my leg, and I hobbled out there, and first sergeant's there. I'm like, hey, first sergeant, there's not any room left in these trucks, but I'm wounded. Are you guys coming back for more? Like, oh yeah, don't worry about it, Brown. We'll be back. They never came back. Fortunately, we packed things up and returned to the fob like as the sun went down. But I had to stay at the fob until the next day, where they finally brought me to the bigger base to get my wound dealt with. And by the time I got there, this was the next morning. We got up, we got on a convoy, and by the time I got to my stuff and was getting ready to walk to the med bay, all the adrenaline had worn off, and I could barely walk. I remember that trip without crutches or anything, like hobbling from one support to the next, just all by myself, like feeling just totally helpless. And I get there, and they clean me up and give me some crutches, and I basically just hung out at the base for the last couple of weeks of the deployment, because this was right at the end. But they did the awards ceremony a couple weeks later, and yeah, there was like 20 of us that got Purple Hearts at that ceremony.
That's incredible. Yeah, I was going to say, you hear some of these stories, and you rarely hear anybody talk about how they felt the next day. I mean, especially with that big of a concussive blast rolling through your body, on top of being shot, like the amount of aches and pains, it probably feels like a car crash. You've been in a car crash the day before, I would imagine.
I was pulling glass out of my toes and my belly the next day. I didn't even notice glass in my foot for a day because of the adrenaline.
Holy cow.
It's crazy.
The human body is absolutely incredible. You mentioned the dissociation. I'm sure we both had clients that have dissociated terrible, terrible things in their childhood or in war, but the human body is absolutely incredible. The fact that it is designed to have these protective responses within it, it's incredible.
Yeah, it really is.
Okay, so obviously you're a hot mess coming out, if I can say a typical vet, or at least what people envision. The angry veteran that's taking swipes at, friendly people back home that don't understand, or for whatever reason. And your dad obviously intervenes, which was providential. You get back, you're going to school, you feel like God leading you into clinical work, like pick up from there, like take us into, kind of the next steps, and, obviously growing veterans.
Yeah. Well, going through school, once I made that switch, I focused all my coursework on trying to understand what are the major issues that the veteran population faces, and what are some creative solutions to that. My unit had a serious suicide problem after I got out. There was an article in the New York Times written about us, about the number of guys who had killed themselves, and the Facebook group that we were using at the time to try to like prevent it from happening to more. It was a rough time with all the suicide. So that was like my underlying driver, is like, what is the reason for this? Why do people get to that point where they're going to make that decision? And I, thinking about the guys who had gone down that road that I knew, they were all the guys who nobody really expected it, but they were also like not talking to a lot of people. They weren't checking in. They were isolated. And so I kind of latched on to this isolation piece as being foundational to kind of like a precursory step that might lead to suicide. And so with growing veterans, the whole idea was, we're going to use the farm as a catalyst to prevent isolation. We're going to have it as like a community effort where people, vets and civilians, can come out together. We're growing food, we're producing life. There's a lot of like great symbology there. And we can donate it to food banks. We were selling it in markets for a while, but at this point it's just all donated to local food banks. So, we're, regardless of where the food's going, it's being used to sustain life. And for vets who'd been to war and taken life, like that sort of juxtaposition is really powerful. So that was the premise. We're gonna use the farm as a catalyst to grow food, community, each other, and hopefully offer the world kind of an example of what, I guess, an antidote to isolation could look like. And that was in 2012. I started it after I graduated undergrad, while I was applying to grad school, kind of same year-ish. And I ran the organization for the first 3 years as the executive director. But once I graduated grad school, I had to move on to the board to pursue my licensure hours. Was there something else about growing veterans that you asked?
No, I was just kind of picking back up on the chronological nature of where you're at, and how, obviously I didn't know the backstory of how it started, and some of the specifics there. So I appreciate you filling in some of those blanks.
Yeah, but I guess I can add, before I keep going, that initial vision, it has played out over and over again for individuals that have showed up to the farm. I mean, I've heard it, we heard it when I was there, and then being on the board since, I hear these stories from the farm that keep happening. Somebody shows up, they're really quiet, and then they keep coming back, and then a month or two later they reveal, the day I came out, I was planning to kill myself. This was like my last hope in humanity, kind of a thing. We've heard that over and over and over again. So, even if it's just those people's lives that growing veterans has had an impact in, it's like, that's a success in my mind.
Yeah.
So yeah, I still am on the board there, and it's currently led by Cody Call, He's a Air Force PJ veteran, super solid guy, really smart, really passionate about the work. So that's going well. When I graduated with my MSW, Master's in Social Work, I kind of had to make this decision whether or not to keep the organization going, like keep building it, or hand that off to somebody else and pursue my licensure hours. And that was not an easy call to make. Like this is my baby. I feel like the work isn't done yet. You probably get it.
I joke around and say I have 3 kids and this is my 4th kid.
Yeah, the work's not done yet. I can't just say goodbye. So I made it work by staying on as the president of the board, and the whole time my main role has been supporting the executive director in that capacity, just to make sure that they feel supported and kind of keep them aware of the vision and kind of the historical knowledge and all that. But I made the call and I made that switch, and then I got hired at the VA at Vet Center, which people may be familiar with at this point. The Vet Center program is a VA program that is kind of separate from big VA healthcare, that was initially created by and for Vietnam vets as kind of a peer support program. And over the years, it morphed into, we're doing clinical work, we're treating PTSD, but to kind of stick to the root of the program, we're mostly hiring veterans to fulfill that function. So the Vet Center program, when I started there, it was still like largely veteran clinicians who were able to, support vets in a clinical capacity, but also have that like instant peer rapport sort of thing that really seemed to help. So I, in my mind, it's like, I'm all about peer support. This is like peer support plus. Like I get to keep working with my people and, develop my skills as a clinician. And so, I did that for 7 years. And over those 7 years, the program itself started to just look different. It started to feel more and more like big VA. Mm-hmm. There were decisions made at kind of higher levels that didn't make sense to me and started to impact my ability to, focus on quality over quantity. So a lot of that sort of, I guess, led me to start to look up and see what else is out there. And I guess relevant to, I think, why we're here in part to talk about psychedelic stuff. This was when I started learning, probably midway through that time at the VA. I heard from a handful of clients who had gone and done these experiences with psychedelics that initially I was super skeptical of, like, what the hell is a psychedelic going to do to help your mental health? You're just going to go trip out for a while and feel better? Like, that doesn't make sense.
Such a West Coast idea.
So I start probing with questions like, what did you learn? What was the experience like? What kind of insights do you have? And I was shocked to be hearing answers that sounded like the answers I would get after, half a dozen rounds of EMDR with me. It's like, you got all that from this? And so that really like caught my attention. And I started to kind of read up on it. And an opportunity came up to take the MAPS training with the Bronx VA. This was during COVID, and they were doing a virtual training. So I took this virtual training. It was their whole 100-hour training with Michael and Annie Mitthoffer, which were the early kind of creators of that MAPS protocol and researchers. It was a really great training. But I couldn't help but like compare the way that they talk about the inner healing capacity that the plant medicines can facilitate, and the way that EMDR clinicians talk about how the mechanism of EMDR allows somebody to access this kind of inner healing intelligence. So to me, it was like all just intuitive, like this makes sense. This is another way to get to the same outcome. And so, you know, going back to that frustration at the higher ups within my program, we had one come out to our office, and I had shared about the MAPS training and how excited I was about, you know, because we were hearing these really cool healing stories from the researchers. And he laughed in my face, and he said, "There's no way that the VA is going to be doing psychedelic therapy in my lifetime." And so I like swallowed it, and that day I decided, like, I am not going to stay here. If this is the attitude of the people making decisions, like, I can move on. Yeah. And, you know, so here we are a couple years later, and our president signed this executive order to really speed up the research and access to things. It's wild how fast. I mean, it's felt kind of slow, but at the same time, pretty fast.
Yeah, it's been quick.
And I bet that guy that told me that is like pulling his hair out right now.
As a counselor educator, so my full-time job, I'm helping raise up master level counselors. That's my discipline, and so we're getting them competent and comfortable. But one of the things I talk about, and I just personally believe about the profession, is we are stuck between what the research says, which is very slow on a timeline, and what is helping the client now, right? We live in this gray zone between the two, where we're ethically mandated to do evidence-based practices, but also ethically, if something is working and helping the client, there's a strong argument that we need to lean into that and discover that. And so there's a bit of art, I would argue, in that balance. And for the last, almost 10 years, 8 years, I've been in this space, and this is exactly the conversation, that I wanted to get into in this podcast specifically, because as clinicians, and I was having this discussion literally this last week at a consortium, like a mini conference of a bunch of, I'll say really accomplished individuals. And I was literally having this discussion about psychedelics, and there was one, doesn't matter, a couple of people that had a similar thought process as maybe your former boss. And I respectfully, okay, but inwardly I'm almost like screaming, like, as a clinician, how can you not recognize where we're at and just look at the anecdotal evidence, to your point of like, there's something changing here. There's something that is being reported that is very, very effective. And so, I get it. Everybody's got a different approach to what they do and why they do that. But I think if we're not honoring that middle zone, we're not honoring like really the profession as a whole, because there are going to be things that clients are pursuing or clinicians are playing with that are going to be not necessarily evidence-based treatments yet. And we need to pay attention and figure things out in the process.
Yeah, I remember in the early days, I'd sit in these weekly staff meetings with a PsyD, a PhD, and 2 LCSWs. And the 2 doctorate level clinicians would always get into these like theoretical, we just like sit back and watch them think. Yeah. It was great. But one of them, he'd said this multiple times. He's like, clinicians doing the frontline work, they are usually 5 to 10 years ahead of research. And I remember interacting with some VA researchers who said, when it comes to research leading to evidence-based practice, that can take, I think it was like 10 or 15 years.
Yep.
So, I mean, if you look at that gap in time between frontline work and evidence-based practice, this could be like a decade or two, right?
Easily.
So, I mean, I don't have an answer to that, but it's a dilemma that we face for sure.
The consequences are not as dire, but I will parlay or compare this to your time in the military. When you were out on patrol, you guys were forced to figure out what works to keep each other safe, and your tactics changed based on the safety of that operating area or area of operation, right? AO. As clinicians, obviously it's not that, dire and serious, but you could argue there's a very similar dynamic where you are trying to figure out per the client, the presenting problems, what is working, what is not working, here and now. And yes, there needs to be ethics applied, and yes, we should be using evidence-based approaches, but you're going to modify things, especially when something new and seemingly very effective starts to roll into your office very regularly. And specifically with the special operations community, I've said this several times on this podcast, the client that introduced me was like, I'm going whether you want to or not. Like, you're either going to be my therapist or you're not. And we had built enough of a rapport. It was like, okay, like, let's start figuring out screeners to keep you as safe as humanly possible, but also let's do some data gathering on the here and now, because I don't know when you come back what it's going to look like.
Yeah. Yeah, we improvise, adapt, and overcome.
Yeah, imagine that. So talk to us about preparation, treatment, integration, and why that's important.
Well, these are the three phases outlined in the psychedelic-assisted therapy model, and they're well established over the last many years of research, and I would say the many decades before that, through the research that was happening earlier in the kind of first half of the 1900s, and then kind of the underground movement in between the two research eras. This is a best practice identified over many, many years. Preparation meaning this is how we make sure somebody's in a place where they're ready for plant medicine, they're a good candidate. There are like contraindications that matter, and not everybody should do it. So in that preparation phase, you kind of go through assessments and make sure that it still makes sense for somebody's treatment goals. And if they're getting close to that point where they're getting ready to do the experiential, and I'm speaking from like a harm reduction integration therapist side, this might look a little different if somebody's actually administering the experiential phase too. They'd probably talk about norms and processes and what that experiential treatment is meant to look like. But if you're supporting somebody kind of before and after they go and do that independently, you don't get into the weeds there because somebody else is doing that, and that's outside of your scope. But something that I, as an EMDR clinician, have come to appreciate in the preparation phase, we have tools like resource development, stabilization techniques, different things that help somebody like really gain a sense of confidence over their ability to self-regulate, and having those skills, some level of mastery of those skills before you go and do a psychedelic experience that could put you in an altered state of consciousness, could activate difficult feelings. It's good to have tools that work for you ahead of time.
And for those that don't know, maybe flesh out what those different stabilizing tools will actually do if somebody's activated either in their preparation or even during the ceremony or the treatment phase.
Yeah, I think it's easiest to think of this kind of at the nervous system level. If we're activated, our nervous system is in an activated state. our nervous system signals are all chemical and electrical, right? And so all these chemical electrical signaling are leading to my heart racing, my palms sweaty, my muscles tensing up. And these tools are designed to kind of redirect the flow of chemical and electrical signals, bring them back up into the part of the brain where they're probably going to be more useful in that moment and help mitigate and suppress those difficult symptoms. So it's kind of, they're really intended to reset, in a way, reset the nervous system back into a state where everything's just easier, more manageable.
Well said. So it's really important, especially it sounds like for good ethical preparation for, I would argue, trauma work in general, but for sure, when we're talking about plant medicine, giving them tools so that when they are getting ready or going to be in a treatment, anytime that they potentially could be activated, their nervous system is activated, they have tools to deregulate or re-regulate themselves. Yeah. Talk to us about the treatment. Obviously, you're not there. They're probably going someplace to a treatment facility, but what is that phase like? And as clinicians, like, what do we need to be aware of?
Yeah, well, there are many options that potential clients have nowadays for this. I always, if this conversation comes up, I always encourage them to be looking for the most legal, ethical, kind of validated options that there are. You know, being in the veteran space, I think some of these nonprofits like Vets or Parks Project, Mission Within, you know, they have formal processes in place. We've interacted with a lot of them. They seem to be quite thoughtful about how they're approaching it. So I'm usually not too concerned if they're working with like another organization like that. Mm-hmm. You know, occasionally somebody might have a plan to kind of go to some random place that I've never heard of, and you know, like from a harm production point, like I can exercise caution and encourage them to do all the research they can before they make that decision. But you know, like you said a minute ago, if somebody's got this in mind that they're going to do it, they're going to do it regardless of what I have to say. So you know, there are limitations there. You know, I live in Washington, so some of my clients might be considering a short trip to Oregon, where psilocybin therapy is accessible and legal. Folks who are, you know, in and around Colorado probably have similar conversations with their clients. And you know, who knows what this, I know that I've seen some stuff out of the state of Texas now, this recent executive order from Trump. Who knows what that'll lead to, but I think another likely realm of options would be in like the research realm. You know, clients getting signed up on a research project where they're able to do like an FDA approved research study and access the therapy that way. I've seen legitimate critiques about the research setting if it's not well thought out and kind of in a more sterile, like hospital room. Probably not going to be an experience compared to some of these other well thought out settings that groups might do.
Why do you think that is? Just personally, any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, set and setting is a big thing that is talked about in the psychedelic therapy realm, and the setting really is about the physical space you're in. There seems to be, when you're under the altered state of consciousness or the plant medicine, there seems to be a stronger, heightened sense of awareness and connection to like nature. And if you have that while stuck in a sterile office room, that I think can create some internal tension. and like uncomfortable feelings that might get in the way of the actual healing that could be happening. So I think that's a big part of it. But mindset and setting are important. And so like in the preparation part, if I'm talking to somebody that I know has plans to go do this and it fits in their treatment goals, we might use EMDR to it. I guess I should back up and preface this. One of the contraindications for psychedelic therapies is untreated PTSD, which is kind of weird to think about all these people with PTSD wanting to use psychedelic therapies. And so what that really means is, has somebody at least developed some of the, grounding techniques and coping strategies that we talked about a few minutes ago? And I think the next layer of consideration is how keyed up and active is this trauma right now? I've had clients where we've done like standard EMDR targeting specific traumas well in advance of them going and pursuing a psychedelic retreat or something. And I believe that helped them get into a place where it's easier for them to access the content that might come up. So that might be another way to think about preparation, is like actually just doing therapy for a little bit before you go. So the experiential, did you have a question about the experiential?
No, I was just curious from your perspective, having gone through the MAPS training. I wanted you to, just explain the three phases of, preparation, treatment, integration, and then anything that we need to be aware of thinking through it. And I mean, you hit on a lot of this. We're not physically present, but there's things that we can, obviously as clinicians, prepare them ahead of time, but then also think through and if they're choosing something that's not reputable, like the ones you mentioned, some things that they may want to chew through and think about.
Yeah. Well, then let's maybe skip to the integration.
Okay. Yeah.
So if somebody's gone and done this work, there's not necessarily a guaranteed outcome, right? Like some people have these amazing spiritual mind kind of shifting experiences that it looks like they don't have PTSD anymore. Other times people have these experiences that are incredibly traumatic and horrifying and activate more symptoms and make life even harder. So the integration phase obviously is going to look different depending on sort of which end of that spectrum we're talking about. If it's the kind of more hopeful, optimistic side, integration would look like more reinforcing. Like, let's take what you have come to learn about yourself and your trauma. And, from my EMDR lens, I use future templates is a really great tool for that. We're trying to really install and reinforce positive thoughts, positive feelings, kind of visualizing, bringing that all with you into the future. That can be a really great, integrative resource for somebody that's had a good experience like that. But if it was more difficult side of things, then we're more looking at using EMDR to support processing, maybe even the experience itself, right? If there's specific traumas from the past that experience brought up, we're going to be targeting those with the EMDR. We're trying to help the nervous system kind of heal and resolve whatever may have happened, whatever it's still holding on to. I'm on the international work group for Psychedelic-Assisted EMDR, and there's two authors in the UK that wrote a book on this, and one of them has used it to address I'm spacing on the term. It's psychedelic induced psychosis, I want to say is the name of the term. She used it for somebody that had a really adverse experience to psychedelics, used EMDR to target that, and it resolved the psychotic symptoms.
Wow.
I mean, this is a very skilled clinician with a lot of experience and training who wrote the book on it. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend anybody just give that a try.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that goes back to what we were saying earlier, right? Like there's these frontline people that just improvise and adapt and do really great work that may not become an evidence-based practice for another 20 years. And that's just kind of the world we live in, I guess.
Yeah, I was just going to add a footnote for anybody that's not tracking with EMDR. We've got a video going over all of EMDR specifically, and an individual that learned from Francine Shapiro herself. It's Dr. Sprow's video. So if you're just kind of lost at this point, jump down there, watch that video, and maybe bookmark this and come back. On EMDR, so and last note I'll put on the EMDR piece that I think is helpful for people to follow. So EMDR, you're doing bilateral stimulation. So you can do, tapping. I've been using Chris's stones actually remotely with some of my remote clients. So they've got stones, and then through an app, I can control the speed and the intensity of all that, which is helpful. Sometimes they follow a bar or a light across the screen. But to really dumb it down, the idea is the human mind wants to repair itself, similar to if I cut myself, I don't have to tell myself to heal the cut. It just does it. And so the idea to be able to go back to where maybe psychologically the individual was wounded, and then using bilateral stimulation, they can hopefully heal and get towards a point of resolve.
Yeah.
But also, like Chris was noting, EMDR has also been shown to be very, very helpful for future or positive things that we can help reinforce. And so I'm hearing you say that, when individuals are coming back from a treatment from psychedelics and they've had some insights, some ahas, that we're wanting to almost solidify those using EMDR with the BLS as well.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. I'm curious. Here, good. We've got kids, so I'm just like, it's not my dog, not my kid. I can just ignore it. What does MAPS? And I'm blanking on, so you can correct me. It's multi-association of, what is it? What does MAPS stand for?
I don't think they even have that name anymore. I think it's
okay
now, but it used to be the Multidisciplinary Association for
Psychedelic Studies. Yeah. So, and MAPS was kind of the gold standard of training within the clinical realm for, I would say, the last decade. Is there any specific, right? So we've got an individual, they're going to pursue a psychedelic treatment. And there's coaches, and we're actually going to interview a coach that'll be in this series. So we're going to learn what they do and how they're getting prepared. But for the clinician, right, they come back, we're ready to do integration. Does MAPS recommend a specific evidence-based approach? And, as you're thinking through that, it's just to the audience, this is one of the things that I've continued to say, like, we just don't know, is we have clients that come back, well, which therapy modality works best with this? And so obviously, I know you're big on EMDR, but I'm curious, Chris, what did MAPS say, or did they, recommend one over another?
They did not prescribe a specific modality. I think they wanted it to be accessible no matter what modality you're kind of coming to it from. That being said, I did notice some kind of like IFS, parts work, ego state kind of language throughout. So I think that probably was something that informed at least parts of it. But again, just to give credit to Jocelyn Rose and Hannah Rainsmith, the EMDR clinicians in the UK that wrote the book, they make a really solid case that EMDR might be the best option for supporting this psychedelic integration work. And it, because it's one of the most effective at any stage, and in particular, an adverse experience stage. There's not many other treatment modalities that can touch that in the way that EMDR can.
Mm.
So it's hard for me to not get on the EMDR soapbox. Like, I'm a super strong believer and proponent for it. I've just seen it do amazing things to people. But to answer your question, no, there's not necessarily a definitive modality that I recall being told that we need to specialize in.
Okay. So just to tie those two pieces together for those that maybe aren't following, so EMDR is really built upon this idea that the brain wants to heal itself, right? Like I mentioned, you don't have to tell yourself when you cut yourself to heal yourself. Similarly, if I'm not, correct me if I'm wrong, the idea of psychedelics is not the idea of psychedelics, but it sounds like psychedelics is getting the individual into an altered state where possibly, this is your theory or this is their theories, the ones that wrote the book, that we're playing off the same system in getting the client, the individual, the person to a state, obviously through altered conscious, where they're able to navigate and process some of their trauma and or could be SUD, so substance use addiction, and come to some sort of resolution. So through that altered state on the back end, there's less of a desire to pursue the substances, and or, you know, their nervous system is less reactive to that memory if it's traumatic. Am I pairing those two appropriately?
Yeah. I mean, I can kind of talk about some of the research studies I've read about how EMDR works in the brain.
Please.
That might kind of complement that. So there's the two studies that I've read about BLS specifically, the bilateral stimulation. What it showed was when we're having this bilateral left to right kind of activation, there's two things that seem to be happening in the brain. One is the hippocampus, the part of the brain that's responsible for like vivid memory recall. It's activated more. Like it starts to light up a bit more. And at the same time, the amygdala, the fight or flight switch, tends to get suppressed. Maybe not entirely, but it's more suppressed than usual. And so this is a brain state where you're able to look really close at the worst memory of your life without being as overwhelmed by it as you might normally. And so the phrase that EMDR clinicians use to kind of describe that is the window of tolerance. So the brain is in a expanded window of tolerance where it's in a very efficient like processing mode. And the outcome, one of my favorite studies that I like to show people is it took pictures of a brain before and after EMDR. This person was told to think about the traumatic memory before EMDR. They took a picture of the brain, and it's lighting up like basically the primitive brain right by the amygdala, just, you know, right in there where the automatic kind of trauma response would likely occur. They do EMDR on that memory, and then they're asked to think of the memory again and take a picture of the brain again. And now it's like far away in the cortex, back in the kind of back part of their brain. And this is, I think, showing what we call memory reconsolidation. So it's literally like, it's like taking where the memory is stored, pulling it away from that automatic kind of PTSD activation response, and putting it in a place of the brain that's more adaptive and able to like still have the memory. The EMDR doesn't erase memories, but it might change where it's stored and how it's stored and allow it to not have such an effect on your day-to-day function. You know, you were using the cut analogy. I've heard this analogy used before with a splinter, and I think splinter is good because it signifies that something's in the way of healing. So if you imagine like this big nasty splinter in your hand, it's been there a while, it's infected, it's swollen, it's not looking pretty. You could apply some kind of cream, right? Like antibiotic moisturizing cream to address the symptoms. But in order for that thing to heal, you've got to pull the splinter out. And so that pulling the splinter out is kind of like how I think of EMDR. We're going in and removing the blockage that's preventing the healing in the first place. I don't know why I got on that tangent. I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
That's helpful though.
No, yeah. You made me think of a tangent as well, specifically with individuals that maybe don't understand what we're tasked with as clinicians. So, baseline assumption or understanding of what we know about most, I'll say, elements or presenting problems within our realm as clinicians is this idea that all good therapy is built on exposure therapy. And specifically, you can't just, open somebody's box of tricks, childhood wounds, war, first responders, exposure to traumatic things, haphazardly, right? This goes back to what Chris was talking about. We want them to have grounding techniques, tools, so that as their nervous system responds to these things, they're able to calm themselves down. Obviously in session, but we're there to help them do that. But outside of sessions, because we see them maybe an hour a week, sometimes 2 or 3, depending upon the type of program that they're involved in. Why that's so important, and specifically, I just want to highlight what you're saying with EMDR. Why that's so important is because this is the tricky nature of trauma from a clinician standpoint, is we have to have some sort of exposure at some level, but keeping the nervous system calm to a point where they're still in that window of tolerance, where they can learn and grow, but not re-traumatize them. And bad therapy, you're either not in that window, so we're not really opening Pandora's box, or we're opening it and they feel completely out of control and their nervous system is running wild. And they walk away from therapy and they say, that was the worst experience of my life. Like, all I did was talk about, my worst day over and over and over. And I went home and I had nothing that I could really ground myself with. And unfortunately, you and I have heard stories like that from previous clients that just, unfortunately had bad experiences with clinicians. And so that is a very, very tricky and specific ratio or balance per each client. And so having a tool like EMDR that has evidence, to your point, quite literally imagery showing that the individual can be activated, but at the same time, their nervous system be somewhat subdued. Very, very helpful, like extremely helpful. And again, we could, dive into EMDR to the nth degree and why it's so helpful versus, I'll say, some other evidence-based approaches. Maybe we'll get into it, but that window of tolerance and the idea that we've got to expose the person on some level to the trauma, I think is really, really informative.
Well, to try and reiterate that, a quick story. I had a lot of respect for the guys that taught me as an early clinician. Like I said, one of them was an Army medic. One of them was a Vietnam special forces captain. The others were the doctors, and they all would sort of endorse the same idea. The reason, and they all did EMDR, and the reason they chose EMDR is because it is, in terms of like the other options, it's pretty low stakes for the client. You don't have to do a lot of homework. You don't have to just like keep reliving over and over and over again until it's like not hurting anymore. You typically can go in and out in one session and have a difficult memory resolve. Sometimes it takes 2, occasionally it takes more, but often it's like a single session and that memory is feeling very different. And so like working at the VA, we had a lot of people come from other programs that were doing these other modalities and, you know, having to do this homework and weren't being taught the regulation skills beforehand. So they're having these like terribly challenging experiences with like no tools to manage it. And they end up dropping out of treatment. They're like, I can't do this anymore. This is not healthy or sustainable for me. And then they maybe give therapy another try a year later and end up in my office, right? So yeah, that's, I guess what I'm trying to get at is that is one of the main reasons why I was so excited about EMDR in the first place, is because it allows clients to actually go through all of treatment, complete treatment, and feel better without having this like terrible experience along the way. It's great. I'm super biased, so.
Hey, that's okay. I mean, the evidence supports that. I think in the 10 plus years that I've been working in the clinical realm, I haven't seen anything work as fast as EMDR and or psychedelics. I'll also say, going back to that idea of exposure therapy, is the reason the preparation is so important is because, unlike EMDR, you know, if Chris is working with somebody, I'm working with somebody, we can pause. Whereas when somebody takes the opportunity to go take psychedelics, you're probably, well, you're not in control of what your mind wants to expose you to. And, you know, Stacy was just on here sharing her experience. You have no real conception of time. And so you're thrown into the deep end, and it can feel like a really, really, really long time swimming with some of your personal darker places. And so again, EMDR may be a much quicker and a gentler approach than a lot of them, and even with psychedelics, because hey, if today's just overwhelming, like, hey, we don't have to go there, like we can pivot, as opposed to, you know, what we're talking about with psychedelics. On the integration, are there other things, you know, so Stacy said this, but also 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, Lindsay, who I think Stacy's episode came out, and actually I may think yours may go second, and then I may have Lindsay, but Lindsay brought up this idea that, you know, there's like a window, maybe like a 6-week window, where post-treatment there seems to be a lot of malleability in people's stuckness, you know, some of the things that they're struggling with. I'm curious, your thoughts and opinions on, you know, is that window accurate, and what have you seen there?
Yeah, they call it the window of neuroplasticity. And I should have mentioned it earlier in the integration phase because it's a key ingredient. The plant medicine puts the brain in a state where it is more malleable for, I've read anywhere from a couple weeks to a few months, depending on, I think, the substance. I think it's always from the macro doses, though. Anyways, that's kind of a distracting time. Leveraging that window is kind of my whole way of understanding my role as an integration therapy person. It's like we want to try to meet as much as, you know, at least weekly, or I'm sorry, at least every other week. Some of my clients I'm on like every other week or even monthly basis, but in those windows we want to meet as often as we can to try and leverage the neuroplasticity that your brain is kind of in. And that might be, you know, again, depending on the person and what they experience is like, it might just be, we're going to use that time kind of from more of a behavioral perspective, like what are the new routines, the new things that you should be doing to just kind of like make sure you're living in the most healthy, optimal way you can. If you start doing those in that window of neuroplasticity, I think it's easier for that to become a new like habit or norm, right? So like looking at just basic healthy lifestyle things sometimes can go a long way. But if there is more to be done, maybe the psychedelic experience revealed some challenging point from childhood that really wasn't fully addressed during the experience, we can leverage that window to do EMDR on that and kind of strengthen the potential for that to have that long-term staying power. That's kind of the way I think of it, is like whatever we can do in that window, it's going to have more potential to stick in the best ways possible, right? Did that answer your question?
Yeah. What are kind of non-negotiables? Let's say somebody's watching this and either they are considering an organization that's not, mission within, vets, heroic hearts, or their loved one is, or maybe it's a clinician watching this and, they haven't chosen one of those three organizations. What are like baseline musts that you think that they should be doing with their clients, but also typically, I'll just say typically, in this realm, there's usually a coach associated with whoever's doing the treatment, or maybe even the coach is a part of the treatment team. What should that relationship look like?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. So it's a tricky one because of the ambiguity in like legal and ethical stuff as licensed clinicians.
Did MAPS hit on that at all?
Well, their whole thing was directed toward FDA-approved research.
Right? Okay.
This is the protocol that's being used in these FDA-approved research studies. That's what it was all about. So there wasn't really an opportunity to explore this side of things. So, I mean, I guess as a disclaimer, I don't ever tell someone what to do when it comes to this stuff. I might have thoughts about how to exercise caution. I might myself kind of be more or less worried depending on what the person's saying they're planning on doing. The things that would make me less worried would be the kind of the stuff I mentioned earlier, like these reputable, well-established, they at least got a few years sort of track record. I've heard from other people that have done it, good things, like, and a lot of those do have these sort of coach aspects where this is kind of like an in-between person that can be easier for a clinician to consult with, theoretically. If a clinician is consulting with somebody that's administering the drug and it's outside of a legal context, that can put the clinician in kind of murky waters, right? So that's something that licensed clinicians have to think about. The ones that I'd be maybe a little more concerned with, or like just unsure of, would be probably, obviously, if a client is planning to just like go pick up some drugs off the street and hope for the best on their own, I would like very strongly try to talk them out of that. I think that's sort of the worst case. One that I'm pretty apprehensive around is these psychedelic churches. Like there's these churches all over that, some of them, to give them credit, seem to be pretty well thought out and not actually like, I guess, too spiritually, what's the word I'm trying to think of? You might
infused.
Yeah, sure. They're just kind of like more there to support people to have what seems to be like healthy access, but again, not legal. Some of them are. That's another thing with the churches, is like there are a few that are federally sanctioned and there are many others that aren't, and the others that aren't exist with under the assumption that because these were sanctioned, they're kind of grandfathered. But from what I've been told, that's not necessarily real. So, you know, like there's just a lot of like murkiness there, even on the legal, ethical side. But
let me fill in. Sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to finish by saying, I think one of the reasons I'm apprehensive about those is because I don't have a lot of like context or understanding of how they work, and I've never interacted with clients that have done that. But if I were to, I think I would have quite a bit of caution or suspicion about it.
Yeah.
If that was their intention, I might try to steer them toward one of these more credible options that we've talked about.
I just wanted to, like, for the people that aren't in this space and have no idea, or maybe they're a young clinician watching this, I send a lot of my students these videos and say, hey, if you're interested, check this out. Let me set the stage of what we're tasked if we're going to operate in this space. And by operate, I mean a client comes to us and says, hey, I'm thinking about doing psychedelics. First and foremost, if they're choosing, you know, even one of our partners here at Soft Network, so it could be Heroic Hearts or Vets, when they leave, our license is state bound. So first and foremost, if you know, there's someplace else and that state doesn't allow us to cross boundaries, and our state that we're licensed in doesn't allow us to cross boundaries, like we can't do work over there as a licensed clinician, first and foremost. So it creates this gap, and let me back up. Individuals have created coaching training programs for individuals who want to help people as they're going to go and do a treatment, a plant ceremony treatment. And so oftentimes as clinicians, we're trying to network with the coach who starts to talk to them before they leave, and sometimes is at the facility walking them through the treatment, and then continues with them once they come home. And ideally, in a perfect world, those two people, there's ROIs, releases of information, and so communication can flow. But it's almost like handing your client off and you don't know who they're working with or what they're doing and their level of training, which is just on a very basic level what we've been experiencing as clients. It's a very disjointed and kind of wild west of the psychedelic area. I'll at least say one variable that we're dealing with, that we're trying to overcome, a hurdle we're trying to overcome and create a better, safer, crystallized protocol of what that looks like. And so that's why we've worked to sign ROIs, so that if a client says, hey, I'm going to Vets, I can talk to their coach can talk to me, and we can have a mutually beneficial relationship for the safety of that client. The other thing that you hit on that individuals I think out there need to know is I can start a nonprofit today and call it a church, and technically, legally, this is the argument, is if it's my church is centered on the idea of, let's just say, ayahuasca or fill in the blank, psilocybin, and I create all the documents needed for a legal faith-based organization that is a nonprofit per the United States. The argument is, technically, if it's a part of our faith practice, we can now administer and partake in psychedelics. Well, this is where it gets really, really messy, because one, now you're officially introducing this as a religion and a faith. This is no longer a clinical space, even though it seems like it's the workaround. The other piece of where it gets messy is many individuals that have learned about psychedelics and the benefit, they have gone and partake, sometimes for months or years, learning from indigenous people in Central and South America, and then brought these practices to the United States and found this loophole. So quite literally, they're taking a faith from a Central or South American indigenous group and bringing it and then shelling it in a church, but it's very much still, I would argue, a faith. But we're trying to get people to use it as a clinical tool. And so now you do have an infusion of a different worldview while people are in an altered state of conscious, and they're highly traumatized people, which we know from the research, they're very influential. And so as a clinician, this is a really messy swirl.
Yeah.
And we haven't even got into, well, who's creating the ayahuasca, which is, jungle brew. That's the jargon used. Who's creating it? At what dose? Unfortunately, when some of these ceremonies are done, Chris, I don't know how big you are, but like I'm over 200 pounds, and there's individuals that are 250 pounds taking the same dosage as somebody that's maybe 150 pounds. And so, with as much promise that is going on anecdotally, you've seen with your clients, I've seen with my clients, you can also appreciate, our listeners can appreciate the absolute entanglement that we're dealing with ethically and legally, trying to keep our clients safe as humanly possible while they're moving towards these treatment facilities and churches very rapidly. And this is part of the reason this conversation is so important.
Yeah, very well said. Yeah, I mean, fortunately, I haven't had an actual client that has gone and done this church option. But I do know, based on everything that you just so well highlighted, if that did come up in a client session, I would be, trying to do as much of the harm reduction, sort of reflection, exploration, encouraging more research, more options to be on the table. Because if psychedelics as a field is the Wild West, this sort of church thing is even more so. Like it's
absolutely,
it's kind of hard to wrap your head around. So all that to say, you had asked earlier about, what are the ideal options. I think they are, and fortunately our listeners are likely the ones that I would normally be talking to in this capacity, whether it's clinicians or clients. Like, we have great options through these well-established nonprofits that have systems and people and support processes in place to make that like the most ethical therapeutic option that exists so far. We'll see what happens over the next 2 years with different state and federal governmental actions taking place, seemingly all trying to support these efforts. I would imagine that sort of recommendation will morph over time. But for now, I mean, leaning on these organizations that have been doing this work for several years now, I think is as good as it gets for what we have.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And, they've been doing it and are continuing to do it really, really well. And I think it's, obviously, and I'll talk about Soft Network just as an organization. It's our job to, network with them, partner with them, work to perfect our handoff and the handoff back of the client. Obviously continue to have great conversations of what each other can improve and what that process looks like from the client's perspective and how we keep them even safer. Conversations with, treating physicians in case they're on SSRIs or any type of medication that they need to titrate off of before they go into treatment was obviously really, really important, because most of these treatments require the detox of any medication ahead of time. And then there's also, health screeners, specifically with Ibogaine. There's EKGs done ahead of time, which, again, those organizations that we've mentioned typically have a really rigorous health screener on the front end, which is part of the reasons we've partnered with them in the first place, is because we've seen some of that, and they seem to be at least pioneering or pushing those above the rest, I can say, at this point. So yeah, let them do what they do well, and we can continue to network them. I wanted to circle back to you and EMDR and Helicon, because I know you got to eat lunch here in a little bit. And if we're pushing up time, we can push it. But I wanted to give you space to talk about, like, what is Helicon? What are you doing? What's the vision? Like, cast it for us.
I'll make it quick. Over my career, the last decade or so as an EMDR clinician, I've gone through, getting trained, getting certified, becoming an approved consultant. And all along the way, I've just noticed common barriers, challenge points, confusions that shouldn't be there. It's just it can be a confusing, wonky system for therapists on that journey, trying to become a competent, proficient EMDR clinician. And some of it is around learning, some of it is around consultation, some of it is around, just kind of peer collaboration. And so Helicon is kind of first and foremost a software platform that we're designing to streamline that process as best as we can. So any therapist that wants to get plugged into EMDR can kind of join Helicon, have a group, have a supportive tool that helps kind of guide them through the process without as much question or confusion. Different kind of learning and collaboration and consultation resources will be in there. And, that's sort of like phase one, is to just support the EMDR clinicians. But if this is successful and more therapists are getting on there, the phase two goal would be to leverage that network that we're building in the platform and create a more like niche, private, specialized directory with really high caliber EMDR clinicians that we could then offer to the world, whether it's to, different industry groups or, even government agencies or just individuals. We haven't really like sussed all that out yet, but that's kind of like the vision for it. So, being able to support therapists to do EMDR really well and to expand their impact in the world through connecting with aligned clients. That's kind of the big vision.
I love it, for a variety of reasons. The mental health field, as much as there is a huge need for mental health clinicians at the master's level, at the doctoral level, I would also argue the field is completely flooded. And so you've got these huge box brands that have entered the space financially, right? And I'm not going to name them, but they're out there, and
they might see you.
Yeah, they might. But at the end of the day, right, this is a very personalized, and I would argue, depending on your presenting problems, substance use addiction, post-traumatic stress, autism spectrum, fill in the blank. The next evolution of our field is exactly what you're building. We need specialized groups and specialized entities within the field that are recognizable for clients seeking that specific treatment. And we need the individuals in the field like yourself raising the bar and holding a standard, so that when, instead of reaching out to a big box brand in the mental health space and getting a roll of the dice from a clinician, we're going to a trusted brand that has a higher quality of clinicians, that the standard has already been set, trusted, and the experience and the professionalism is everything that we should get from a mental health clinician. And unfortunately, because the field's so flooded, and I would say it's still in a younger state compared to like the medical field, like this is the next evolution. And this is why I'm so excited about the project, because we needed it 5 years ago. And
this is exactly what Soft Network is doing for the soft community, right? I mean, it was that I would be lying if I said that wasn't part of the inspiration behind that sort of second phase of part of the vision for Helicon. I mean, you have shown that is an important model that the world needs. And I think we need to see more of it. But I think it's really important that when these efforts are being done, it's being led by clinicians and not these big box sort of VC investor groups that from all accounts seem to, at some point along the way, get to the point where they have to sacrifice quality, and the quality goes downhill, the clinicians get burned out, they leave. And there's like a 30, depending on what you read, 30-60% of clinicians experience burnout and leave. When I was crunching the numbers with EMDR, I believe, based on my math, only 2% of licensed clinicians are EMDR providers. So, I mean, there's a huge opportunity there for just empowering more clinicians to get into EMDR in the first place. And it's kind of shocking that more aren't.
Yeah.
But hopefully, if Helicon's successful, we'll change that.
Absolutely. And I wish I could take the credit and say I thought of all those things. I mean, selfishly, when I was creating Soft Network, I needed people to hand my clients off to that were retiring or PCSing, but I also just needed to know, like, are there other people that work in this population, and like, what are they doing? Like, what are their resources, and how, like, it was almost out of desperation. But yeah, to your point, I think looking back, it was like, you know, I'll give God all the credit. Like, he's the one that led me into it. But looking back, I'm like, oh yeah, it was all those things that I just mentioned as well. Very specialized, very niche, like complex in the sense of the presenting problems of the community. And so they needed a particular type of provider. But, you know, you were able to capture that, you know, maybe a glimpse of what we were doing, but then roll it out specifically. And so I'm pumped in the coming years. I think it's going to be a really helpful tool. I am the customer. You know, I just got trained in EMDR a couple of years ago, and still in the process of getting my feet wet. And because everything's so remote post pandemic, which is helpful for us, helpful for our clients, especially this community, because they're so busy. I need that network that you're building and that accountability and those resources, because like you said, there's just it's not out there yet. It hasn't been built yet. And so this is why every time we get on a call and you're like, hey, we're doing this, I'm like, man, I need that now. Like, I want that built now so I could just pick somebody's brain and jump in there.
We might be just a month or two out. We'll see how this code review goes.
Hopefully it goes flawless. Anything else you want to add, Chris? I want to respect your time. Obviously, you and I could chop it up for a long time, but anything else?
Chatting for another hour or two. I mean, really, there's nothing pressing to add. I appreciate the opportunity. I think what you're doing here is really cool, and I hope that the folks that end up watching these interviews really get something out of it, whether or not it's for them, for a peer, for a client or a colleague. Like, you know, these sort of human connections and conversations are starting to get drowned out more and more with like AI and just all the craziness online and in the world. So, you know, I hope that if people listen to these and get something out of it, that they go the next step and like talk to somebody else, share the information, make the call to get into therapy, you know, whatever it is, decide to get trained in EMDR, who knows? But like, I guess speaking to anybody that's listening, don't let this conversation be the end. Like, maybe let this be the beginning of something else for you.
Well said. And currently, Chris is licensed in Washington and Arizona, right?
Yep.
So if anybody's watching this and was like, man, I'd love to work with this guy, there's your endpoint. And our national licenses are continuing to evolve. So hopefully in a couple of years, like, you and I will both be licensed across the nation. And, you know, if somebody comes across this down the road, definitely reach out. We'll add in the show notes your website, any other contacts, you know, like Helicon, if you want that in there now. If not, we'll update it later. But man, I was so excited to finally get this. We've tried probably 10 times to schedule this.
Took a while to schedule it
over the last couple of years, but it worked out for today. I'm really appreciative. Thanks for sharing your story. And man, I'm going to have you back because there's a lot of other stuff we got to talk about.
Yeah, we can dive into more next time.
All right, man. Thanks.
Appreciate you.
All right. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. And please share this content with your networks.